Hello, everyone. Welcome to the June Doman Learning question and answer session. Here at Doman Learning, we host a monthly Q&A, which goes live on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And we have parents join from all around the world who are using the Doman Method with their children. I always start by taking questions from parents in the Doman Learning Parents Facebook group. This is a closed Facebook group for parents who have signed up for courses and materials at domanlearning.com. And so we have many pre-submitted questions from that group. I will go through that. And if we still have time, I will then take questions from the general audience. So if you're joining me right now on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, go ahead and type your questions in, and hopefully we'll have the time to get to all of them. Let me begin by starting with a few quick announcements before I get to the questions. So, first of all, I do want to let all of you know, any of you who are parents who are expecting a child coming soon, or have a baby who is an infant, like in the first 6 months of life, I'm just letting you know we're going to be releasing a course soon that's going to be very helpful for you. So just want to let all of you know, if you're expecting or you have an infant baby, just keep an eye out on the Doman Learning social media platforms. We're going to be announcing a course very soon. Second announcement I wanted to make is, this is just a general request that I'm sending out to all of you. The world needs to learn more about the capabilities of young children. It has to learn that young children are capable of learning to read, do math, learn spectacular things. And the best way we can do that, teach the world, when I say we, I mean us and you, is through video. And for example, if you go to YouTube now and you search baby reading, there are many videos of young children reading who have been taught at home through the Doman Method. That is incredibly powerful for another parent to see. And so the reason why I'm saying this is we are asking you, we're kind of doing a call out to all of our parents. If you have videos of you teaching your child, it could be your child reading, doing math, doing Doman cards, right? It could be the sensory stimulation that we do with babies. Anything, we would love to have those videos so we can show off your child and teach the world about the capabilities of young kids and why teaching young children is so important. So if you're up for it, please send your videos to hello@domanlearning.com. I will post this email right now so you can see it. hello@domanlearning.com. Send your videos here so we can share them and show the world. Okay. All right. Last announcement. If you buy anything on the Doman Learning website, any courses, any materials, you can use the coupon code Spencer10 for a 10% discount. So if you on domanlearning.com choose your course, type in that coupon code at checkout, you'll get 10% off any purchase. Okay. Those are my 3 announcements. Let's jump into the pre-submitted questions that I have gotten from parents. All right. The first question that came in is this one. I will pull it up on the screen. This one comes from, I believe, JB. Hopefully I'm saying the name correctly. How does synaptic pruning and periods of forgetting play into how these programs are designed? And the parent who asked this asked specifically about, do young children forget things during that period of synaptic pruning after they've been taught it? For anyone who doesn't know, synaptic pruning is a really important process that a lot of it happens between years 1 and 3, where even though our brain is going through this period of rapid development during those years, the synapses, which are the connections between neurons, start to get pruned, kind of like you're pruning branches of a tree. Those connections start to get pruned. And that is a very important process during childhood because it allows us, as we get older, to improve in our focus and concentration. Now, there's a payoff there. When the pruning takes place, our ability to take in information actually reduces. Very important to understand during that period of synaptic pruning, but our ability to focus and concentrate on learning improves, right? That's why a 12-month-old baby can learn a language faster than me, because they have many more synaptic branches and connections between neurons. It allows them to take in information at an incredible rate. But on the other hand, that baby cannot focus on a task as long as I can. That's very much largely in part because of this synaptic pruning process. By the way, if the synaptic pruning doesn't take place, it can create all kinds of problems later on in life. For example, very often children diagnosed with autism never undergo the kind of synaptic pruning that is necessary. Just a side comment there. So, can children forget information during the synaptic pruning process? Yes. Yeah, it's possible. What I would generally say is, and by the way, there are other periods, even between 5 and 6 years of age, that we find children, again, might forget information that they've been taught. When they go through a period of what's called hemispheric dominance, where their brain decides what hemisphere, what side of the brain is going to be dominant. For example, if I'm right-handed, I'm left brain dominant, right? Because the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body. We've also found children during that period sometimes will forget information they've been taught. But what I would say to parents is, just because they're going to forget certain things doesn't mean it's not a good idea to teach your child as much as you can, right? By the way, we always forget information throughout our lives. But the more knowledge we gain, because the brain is the only container in the world that the more it holds, the more it's able to take in, right? One of my grandfather's most famous quotes, the more you feed your child in terms of knowledge, the more they can learn. So the answer is yes, but the payoff of teaching your child is going to be greater regardless of, if the synaptic pruning happens or not. All right, let me go on to the next question. I've got so many questions, so I'm going to be going through these quickly. The next question is, when showing quantity equations, so these are the quantity cards, many people call these lovingly dot cards, what is the reason that you show the cards, but you only say the operation? Okay, so this is actually something that I teach differently in the course than what is presented in the book. So I understand that in the book, it says that equations can be taught with cards, or you could just say the equations. In the course, in the Math Before School course, which is the math course at domanlearning.com, I always show the cards as I'm saying the equation. So if I'm showing the equation 1 + 2 = 3, I'm saying that. And as I say 1, I'm showing the card with the quantity 1. And then I say +2, I show the quantity 2, and so on. This is because I always like to reinforce everything, both visually and auditorily. So I want the child to hear the equation and see it at the same time. I feel that linking these two things is always going to improve outcomes because we're using two senses to send information to the brain rather than one. So I won't spend more time on that one, but definitely a good question. And by the way, some of these things are things that we have adapted over time. Remember, my grandfather wrote How to Teach Your Baby to Read in 1964. He wrote the math book, I believe, in 1978. Okay, might be off by a year or two there. So we've learned a lot in the last 40, 50 years. And so there are certain things that we've updated since he wrote those books. All right, the next question that came in is, does quantity sense from this program last a lifespan? Great question. This is a question that I get every once in a while. This parent went on to ask, they even said, Spencer, do you, for example, you were taught with the math program, Spencer, if I show you the quantity 83 right now, would you recognize it? So let me talk about myself, and then I'll talk about what I've seen with hundreds or maybe even thousands of children who have learned growing up with this program. No, if you show me the quantity 83, I cannot recognize it now. So for me, the number sensibility with larger quantities did not persist throughout my life. That being said, I did have this as a young child, both because my mother has told me, right? If she tested me, for example, she held up 83 dots and 82 dots and asked me, I could differentiate them. I also have, I believe, some faint memories of being a baby and seeing dot cards, but sometimes it's hard to be sure when you remember these things from a child, where I recall being able to recognize them. But that's my own memory and very anecdotal. If I look at the hundreds of children that I've seen grow up on this program, I have to say, as they get into older age, most, when I say most, I mean, well over 50%, do not continue to recognize large quantities into adulthood. But that being said, let me now tell you about all the benefits I've noticed. I tend to notice, number one, they like math much more than the average population, right? So while if you ask an average group of people, do you like math, you might only get 1 out of 5 people saying yes. I would say vast majority of children that grow up learning math with this program like math. I would argue that alone is probably worth teaching children with the method. If that was the only thing, that would be worth it, but it's not the only thing. Second thing, they tend to be much more competent with arithmetic than others, and they tend to be more successful and enjoy higher math when they learn it into high school and university. So now, why is that? Why do children lose that number sense? It could be during that period of synaptic pruning, because we find very often when it happens in that period somewhere between 2 and 4 years of age. So it could happen because of that synaptic pruning. It might also just be a lack of using that ability, right? Because it's not often in life where we have to look at 85 of something and recognize it. And maybe just not using it, kind of like if you don't use it, you lose it. That's another possible reason. What I always say to parents, now keep in mind, if you watch the Math Before School course, I explain, even for older children, you've got to start with innate number sense. We just don't teach quantities up to 100 with children over 2.5 years of age. And if you watch the Math Before School course and you watch the B module videos for teaching math to children over 2 years of age, I go into a lot of detail about why that is. All right. Let me go to the next question. The next question is, if you only practice the quantity cards up to 100, does that ability extend to quantities above 100, like 1,000s, 10,000, 100,000, and so on? The answer is no, at least not according to my experience. Because most children, just because they haven't been taught something, they're unable to recognize something if they haven't been taught it. So that's been my experience. All right. Happy to answer follow-ups about that. All right, next question that came in, whole word reading versus phonics. Is there a reason why phonics is not in the Doman method? I'm just going to read the rest of this question. I'll post the basic question up on the screen. Yeah, is there a reason why phonics isn't used in the Doman method? I asked. The parent says, I'm asking because I have read that whole word reading in the absence of any phonics instruction can sometimes be implicated in the development of dyslexia, and that it's probably related because reading impairment from dyslexia has been successfully overcome with phonemic awareness. Okay, let me start by answering this question in a practical way. So phonics is definitely not the focus of the Doman method. That being said, we do start to introduce letters after we have started let's say the basic foundations of the Doman method, where we teach words, couplets, sentences, and books. We especially start to get into teaching letters, usually between 3 and 6 years of age, when we're teaching children how to write, okay? Because, of course, you have to recognize letters for writing. And then, of course, being able to recognize letters and understanding the sounds that they make builds this phonemic awareness. Now, I have to say, when I see a lot of criticism of whole word reading, it's often being criticized because whole word reading is not being done correctly. So sometimes people will say, oh, the Doman method uses whole word reading, and there's research that shows that it doesn't work. Here's the thing. if you look at how whole word reading is used in normal first grade classrooms, right? They're teaching the children how to read 20, 25 words in a year. And then they act surprised when the child doesn't learn how to read independently. This would be like if I taught children A and B, two letters, and then I use that as proof that phonetics doesn't work. Like, oh, they can't read phonetically. I only taught them two letters. So the research itself is flawed because they're not teaching children in the correct way. If you look at the Doman method, where we're teaching a child hundreds, sometimes even thousands of words, it's a whole different beast, right? It's like running a marathon compared to running 100 yards. And so children, when they've seen many words, they begin to intuit the phonetics of the language. When children are taught facts, they begin to intuit the laws that govern the language, right? And so, yeah, so in short, that's why whole word reading actually builds up to phonetic awareness. Now, that being said, I'm in the process of writing basically an update about our reading program, and I am going to include information about phonetics. What I will say is, I do not agree at all with the implication in this question that whole word teaching can lead to dyslexia. Dyslexia, and by the way, we have 70 years of experience dealing with dyslexia. Dyslexia is the result of a neurodevelopmental disorganization within the brain. It actually has nothing to do with how reading is taught. Right. The reason why most children learn how to read using phonetics in school, the reason why 2/3 of children in the US learn to read with phonetics is not because phonetics is a great way of teaching. It's because the human brain is hardwired to learn how to read. So whether you teach with whole word approach or with phonetics, most children will learn how to read. The problem is that phonetics 1/3 of the time fails. Right. And we know this because 1/3 of Americans don't read at age level. And so we know the standard approach doesn't work. But even I would never say phonetics leads to dyslexia. Dyslexia is a condition of the brain. Usually it originates in the first years of life due to a lack of development in the brain. And those children need treatment that focuses on brain growth and development. And we've been doing that for 70 years with children with special needs. So we can help children recover, develop from dyslexia with specific activities that help develop the brain. Okay. But I will also make a side comment that there's just absolutely no question in my mind from my experience that the Doman method and a whole word approach is far better for children with dyslexia than phonetics. And I say that after, now 17 years of experience watching children come to us having failed in reading using the old phonetics approach, and then sometimes at 12 years of age learning to read for the first time with a whole word approach. Okay, next question. Reading commercial books to babies. Is there a reason why you shouldn't do this before the Doman reading program at any of the stages? So interesting question. There's nothing should ever delay a parent from reading commercial books to children. If I personally had a baby, I would be reading to them the day I brought them home from the hospital. That's just me personally. I'm not saying every parent should do that, but that's what I would do, because I believe that probably the two most powerful intellectual things we can do for a child is, number one, most important thing in my opinion, is speaking to the child in a sophisticated way, using a wide vocabulary. I think for an intellectual development of a child, that is the most important thing any parent can do. And the great thing about that, it doesn't even require cards, right? You just speak to your child like you're talking to a 25-year-old, and that child will develop a large, rich vocabulary. And I would say talk to your child all of the time, okay? That's the most important thing. And then I would say the second most important thing you can do to your child is read commercial books to your kid, right? And please note that you don't need the Doman method for either of those things, right? You just read books to your kid and talk to them in a sophisticated way. the Doman method, and then I would say Doman method reading is number 3. Okay. But those 2 things alone that I mentioned can help raise a highly intellectual, well-spoken, confident, bright, curious child. Just the way you speak to the child and reading books to them, that alone. By the way, that's how most children were raised up until, I don't know, the Industrial Revolution, let's say. And then we've spent the last 150 years figuring out how to de-genius children. So yeah, just my thoughts. All right, next question. Let's see how much time we have. Ooh, got a lot of questions today. I'm trying to get a sense of how the Doman method feels like to the child. When I went through, this is the parent writing here. When I went through my parents' version of flashcards and didactic early childhood education, I remember often feeling that I didn't consciously know the answer, even if I was getting the questions correct. I often felt like I was giving guessing, intuition, or subconscious knowledge. Yeah, it's hard for me to answer this question because I think it's such a personal question on behalf of the person asking it. And it's an interesting question of, when young children are answering a question, are they fully consciously thinking about the question like we do as adults? Probably not. Having evaluated children for many years, what I do know is that there are when you're evaluating a young child, let's say for reading, like holding up words, you have to make sure that the environment is really excellent for them. There are no distractions, that they're in a good mood, they are well fed, right? Adults are more easily able to adapt to different environments than a child is. And so I guess getting back to this question, it's more easy to kind of make testing hard for a child. And so, yes, do I think that children probably process testing and questions differently? Yes. I also think they take it less seriously than adults do, right? When we're often asked a question as an older child or adult, we know we're being judged. I think young children often don't care. They don't feel judged. And so sometimes they might just answer kind of intuitively. Yeah, I think that's right. There it is. While we as adults probably think more consciously, okay, I've got to give the right answer here. Again, not sure if that's a helpful answer to the question, but those were some of the thoughts that I had. All right, let me move on to some questions. I've got some questions here from Kos, who's asking a question about our math before school course and the addition sets in Module B. He's asking, do I need to teach each set for 1 week? For example, there are 15 addition sets. Doesn't mean I need to teach them for 15 weeks. The frequency is a bit different from Module A. Yes, so that is my recommendation, to teach each set for a week. By the way, that's why the math before school course, the program could last up to 3 years, if you follow the entire curriculum in that course. The only exception is if a child is learning the equations faster than a week, you can shorten the duration. Okay. So let's say after 3 days, your child knows the equations, the answers, you could change them faster, but otherwise do it for a week. All right. There's a question here. Can a neurotypical child at the age of 8 or 10 benefit from the Doman program? It depends, Kos. Good question. It depends. Usually it depends on where the child is in their reading and math skills. If they are a slow reader, and which, by the way, there are many neurotypical kids who may not read quickly because often they're taught with phonetics and they have to kind of spell out words. Or if a child has difficulty with arithmetic, like they're slow in arithmetic, absolutely, the reading and math programs could help them become faster in their reading and mathematics abilities. And when a child becomes faster, their comprehension improves. And also when their comprehension improves, they enjoy it more. So the answer is yes, if the child is struggling in any way. If it's an 8-year-old child or 10-year-old child and they read independently with ease, if they are excellent in math, then I don't think that the programs we currently have would be of great help. The last question from Koss is, this is a good one. How was the reading method discovered? So, interestingly, my grandfather, Glenn Doman, discusses in the How to Teach Your Baby to Read book that the first moment he actually started to develop the reading program was a child named Tommy who had a brain injury, came into his clinic, and he was 3 years old, and he had been taught to read. And he had been taught to read by his parents at home. And that raised an important question for my grandfather, which was, why can a 3-year-old severely brain injured child read, and then neurotypical kids can't? And that's what started my grandfather down the path of early reading. And then I think it was my grandfather's combination of understanding the human brain, along with an incredible curiosity in how children learn, that he was able to create the reading program where he focused on large print and teaching things in a fast and repeated way. Now, interestingly, it was his knowledge of working with children with special needs that helped him better understand that large print was important, because many of those children needed larger print to read. So understanding that concept, and then understanding that young children have vision which is not fully developed, he realized, well, if the larger print helps these children with visual problems read, why don't we increase the print size for all children and see if it helps them? And it did. And then he had also learned from these children who are sometimes hyperactive or have difficulties with concentration, that a fast teaching session, which is only 10 seconds long, was ideal for them, not only to focus and concentrate, but also to take in the information. So essentially, he took his knowledge from working with children with special needs and applied it for young children, right? And by the way, for anyone who works with children with special needs, who might be older, 6, 10, 12 years old, many of them have retained certain behaviors that young children typically have, right? It's very common for 2-year-olds to be hyperactive, to be running all around all the time and constantly moving. It only becomes a problem when the child is 6, 8, 10 years old, and now they can't settle, right? And so that's because the neurological development and organization that needed to take place didn't. So my grandfather learned from those older children, applied it to all children when they're younger, and lo and behold, it worked. Great questions. All right, let's see what else we've got here. All right, I've got a question here about what are the concrete skills that I believe personally that I could attribute to the Doman method. Spencer, would you be willing to talk about what concrete skills you have now that you consider are directly attributable to the Doman method? So before I give an answer to this, I always like to say it is hard for me to say always if something is completely directly attributable to the program, because it's hard for me to say what are things that came directly from the program and what are things that came from the result of my parents being who they are, and my parents just believing that young children are brilliant and speaking to us in a sophisticated way and having high expectations for their children. It's very hard to say, well, this one thing was 100% the result of this, right? And I say that just to be completely honest. So what would I attribute to the Doman method specifically in my life, now that I'm older and I can kind of look back and reflect? I would say, and you, the mother who asked this, asked specifically for things besides reading and math skills, which of course I feel like the program was instrumental in helping me with reading and math. No question about that. But let me move on to other things. So I would say, first of all, both in my experience and with other children I've seen who have grown up on this program, tend to be very fast learners, right? So I think that the quick teaching and learning aspect of the Doman method when a child is young really sets them up for success to learn quickly in the future, going back to the whole thing about the brain is the only container that the more it can hold, the more it can take in. When children learn more at a young age, they are faster learners when they're older. They're also able to make more connections, right? When they learn something new, they're able to connect it with more things because they've learned more things in the past. So, number one, faster learner. Number two, along with being a faster learner, learning was more effortless for me. So, for example, I started college, university, when I was 15 years old. And I attribute that, almost entirely to the Doman Method, along with my parents, just the way my parents raised me. And so not only was learning easier for me than it was for others, right? Not only was it faster, it was more effortless. And that really allowed me to, for example, have a lot of academic success in school. I scored, high grades, A's consistently. I always say I got A's in every class in university until I got a girlfriend. Then my priorities changed. But my girlfriend went on to become my wife. But besides that, getting good grades was never difficult for me. And I have to say, I don't say any of this to brag, by the way. In fact, I don't talk about it a lot because I don't want people to think I'm bragging. I give all the credit to my parents. 100%. It's because of the way they taught me and raised me when I was a young child, not because I'm especially gifted in any way. In fact, just the opposite. So I think when a child is a fast learner and finds learning easy and effortless, it leads to a next natural step, which is curiosity. I've always been a very curious person, and I've noticed that children that grow up on this program tend to be highly curious. They tend to ask a lot of questions. And I think that's because of two reasons. First of all, when learning is easy for you, you want to learn, right? So you ask questions to learn more. But there's another thing, which is when you grow up in a family where a love of learning is a part of the family culture, you intuitively learn to ask questions because in your family, it's not a bad thing to ask questions, right? I know that in some families, a child might ask a question like, why is the grass green? And in some families, adults will shame children for asking questions. They'll say, don't ask that question, or like, grass is green because it's green. Don't ask such a dumb question. But when you grow up in a home that prioritizes learning and loves learning, and you have parents who say, that's a good question. And if they know the answer, they'll tell you. If they don't know the answer, they'll say, let's find out the answer to that. Let's look that up. That's very powerful. And so, so I believe that could be directly because of the Doman method or indirect. The last thing that I will say, if you have a child who learns quickly and loves learning and is curious, that leads to a natural confidence, right? And so very often kids who grow up on the Doman method tend to be the kind of kid who sit up in the front row of the class just because they're curious kids and they're confident, right? Learning isn't scary. Learning isn't difficult. I want to learn. Let me sit up in the front row, and so, those are some of the things that I would attribute to the Doman method. Hopefully that's helpful. All right, let me see. Ooh, I still got some more questions here. Homeschooling from birth. Is it possible using the Doman method? Any tips for the best order to teach things to make the most out of the precious time? So, is it possible to homeschool a child using the Doman method? Yes. Does a Doman method curriculum exist from birth to 18 years of age? No. And we've really been focusing on birth to 6 years of age at Doman Learning, but parents could still take any curriculum for homeschooling and adapt it using the Doman method, meaning taking the information and presenting it in the same way that they teach the Doman method. And many parents have done that over the past several decades. Definitely something we'd love to get to in the future, but we just haven't been able to get to it. There's a question here about the importance of crawling and the reflexes associated with this. What about the standing and stepping reflex? They are also inborn. Yeah, so why don't we focus on that? Well, we focus on reflexes like the Babinski reflex in the book How Smart Is Your Baby because it relates to crawling. The reason why we don't focus so much on like the standing or stepping reflex is because most of the time when an average child starts walking at around 12 months of age, a lot of those primitive reflexes at that point, they've outgrown them. Okay. And so, and by the way, we want children to go through the natural progression of crawling and creeping before they walk, because crawling and creeping develop lower areas of the brain, like the midbrain, which is responsible for auditory processing and visual movement, right? Very important things for learning and focus. And if a child never crawls or creep, they may never develop those abilities. By the way, many of the children with dyslexia don't crawl or creep before they walk, just to let you know, because you asked the question about dyslexia earlier. So crawling and creeping is essential for neurological organization. Many children don't get the chance to do that before they walk. So that's why we focus so much on crawling and creeping rather than reflexes for walking. If children crawl and creep, they will definitely walk and walk with good balance. Okay. Next question. I'm trying to increase tummy time. Oh, by the way, for this parent and any parent who has a baby, we've got something exciting coming up in the next couple of months. So just stay tuned, look at our channels, because we've got a course coming out for you that I think you're going to love. Okay, this parent's pointing out that in one of our books, it's a minimum of 4 hours suggested on the floor for a baby. So just to let you know, there's a little bit of a running joke in the Doman family that if you were to take every Doman book and do every piece of information in those books, you wouldn't be able to achieve it in a 24-hour day. So, and by the way, this is because when we sit down and focus our attention, for example, on mobility development, right, or reading development, we're fully focused on that one important ability. And so we give recommendations. Okay, here's a recommended program for this. But if you were to take all of the different books, line up all the programs, very difficult for anyone to achieve. You don't try with an infant to do 4 hours. Okay. In fact, in this thing we're going to be releasing soon for parents with babies, we're giving some adapted recommendations, which are much more achievable. So what I would be focusing on is giving your child brief periods on the floor throughout the day. Let's say 2-minute sessions, putting your baby down on their belly and trying to just slowly increase the number of sessions. So let's say on day 1, you can do 3 times a day of 2 minutes. Okay, maybe the next day you try to get 4 sessions in of 2 minutes and 5 sessions of 2 minutes and so on. I would recommend doing short periods on the flat floor, okay? And in future editions of the book, we're going to have to update that. All right, let me see if there are any other questions that have come in. I don't see any questions that have come in on Instagram. Oh, I see here a question in what looks like, I'm guessing French. It's not a language that I understand, but it looks like something about a child having an IQ of 148. So congratulations. If I had to guess, it says something like, I'm doing the Doman Method and I don't know, my child has 148 IQ. If I understood that correctly, great. And I'm glad my maybe Italian and Spanish came in handy in comprehending that, if I got it correct. All right, everyone. I'll give everyone 30 more seconds to type in a last question. And just to let everyone know, I made a couple of quick announcements at the beginning of this session. I said, number one, we're going to be releasing something very soon for parents who are expecting a baby or have an infant very, very soon. So stay on the lookout for that. And I also said, what was my other announcement? Oh, I said that if any of you have videos that you can send of you doing the Doman Method with your child, teaching sessions, crawling, sensory development, math sessions, we'd love to have those videos. Or if you have a video of your child showing off their abilities, even better. It's our best way of teaching the world about what the program can do. All right, everyone, thanks so much for joining this session. Come back next month. And if you haven't checked out domanlearning.com or looked at our reading or our math courses, our other courses there on the website, please do. And you can always use the promo code Spencer10 for 10% off purchasing anything on the domanlearning.com website. All right, everyone, have a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.